library. We have a very special treat for you tonight. Unk DaRos probably doesn't need much introduction, but I'll try to give you a little bit anyway. Many of the hats he's worn as stonemason, inventor, firefighter, Eagle Scout, woodcarver, first selectman, amazing diorama maker. He's going to tell you a lot about the quarry, and I'm just amazed at what he has created and the tools he created to do it. So welcome, Unk. Thanks for coming to talk to us tonight.
This is a result of an old guy with nothing to do. But I figured that, you know, when you get up around, you gotta get up a little bit. You need something to do. And I figured I ought to do something that's a little bit maybe historical, or try to salvage some historical facts. And I found that out with the quarry tours that people were interested in this. And so I compiled this, mostly there was some research involved. There was some talking to old timers who were long gone to them, but I do have a memory of them. This was also taken from photographs and sketches by people who actually worked in this quarry. So anyway, I put that together, and my intent was just to do a little piece of the quarry itself. But then I realized that all the way down into Stony Creek, particularly just above the bridge, but the rest of Stony Creek also, was a very important part of the Stony Creek quarry in those days. Just a little bit to show you the importance. In the 1880s, the census in Stony Creek was around 300. Wow. That was 300 people that were fishermen and farmers mostly, subsistence farmers really. And you had our fishermen, and you also had our thriving hotel business that started all the way back in the 1830s and stuff. So you had that, and that was what you had, about 300 people. But then in the 1880s, around the first part of the 1880s up around until 1900, the population exploded into 1950, showed the census, 1,950 people that were here. And that was due to the opening of the quarries, okay? The oldest quarry in Stony Creek was Green's Quarry, which is down on West Point Road. The very end of West Point Road was the very first quarry, one of the very first in Brantford, as a matter of fact. And their main thing was hitching posts and kirking, was their main thing. And they would take it by wagon to wherever their market was, and by water. All up until 1850, all of the quarries were located on the coast. It was the only way you could move that much stone. And whatever quarries were inland were for building purposes in the immediate vicinities. The coming of the railroad in 1850 changed all that, up and down the coast. In fact, when this quarry was operational, it was one of 15 that was fully operational from the East River in Guilford to the Farm River in East Haven. There was 15 of them going full blast. So one of the bigger ones, which was actually bigger than this quarry, or employed more men, was Beatty's Quarry, just over in Leeds Island. Beatty's Quarry was located directly on the water. His dependence was the water, moving it by water. In fact, he had 3 different quarries with 3 different docks. Were in the Beatty's Quarry. And his main business was infrastructure, bridges and things like that, breakwaters, dams. That was basically the main part of that. They had some outstanding jobs, and one of them was the Statue of Liberty. That came from Old Quarry. And I always figured that when I looked on the maps, when that was built, it was actually Brantford. The line was moved to the west, this way. But anyway, it was still Guilford. So we won't argue anymore with the bunch. It was definitely Guilford. And it was, it's a pink granite, but a different pink granite. If you put this side by side with Stony Creek pink granite, you'll see the difference. It's subtle, but you will see the difference. It's much more grainier, and it has a blue tint to it as opposed to having the black mica tints that the Stony Creek pink has. And it's the same stone. The leaks on the core stone is the same stone that is out on the Thimble Islands. Thimble Islands is a pink granite, but it's not Stony Creek pink granite. Stony Creek pink granite is a unique granite being that it cooled under the earth. The surrounding granites around cooled on the surface. And what would happen is you had a much different texture to the stone itself. And and I always say that the Stony Creek pink granite, one of its attributes is that it's consistently inconsistent. And it makes it a stone that people desire. Because of that, you have that, but it's consistent. And anyway, it cooled under the earth. And it had this completely different grains, and mica, and the quartz and crystals were much different. They had a longer time to cool. Consequently, they were different. But there was, like I say, a subtle difference. And then you want to talk about a subtle difference. The stone on top gets weathered over millions of years. We call it, it rots. But if stone could rot. But it does. It from the sun and the heat and the cold, and it changes. And these quarrymen quarried everything. From the top right on down till they got into that real good Stony Creek stuff. And if you wanted to see the difference, go out and look at the two monuments out here at the triangle. The World War I monument was made from the stone higher up. I'm sorry, the World War II monument was made from the top, and the most recent monument was from the Korean War on, was made from the deeper, more quality Stony Creek stone, Stony Creek granite, which by the way is a trademark. And you'll see the difference. If you put them side by side, you see the difference. If you add them all one at a time, you won't know the difference. So, but anyway, that was the uniqueness of the stone. And this, there's only one other place in the world that this stone exists. Only one other place, and that's in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. When the continents were together, they broke right here in Stony Creek. And the Stony Creek got the majority of the pink granite. So, but anyway, there's a quarry down in South America that tried to introduce themselves as Stony Creek pink granite. And I don't know if anybody ever heard of the new Stony Creek pink granite. That was one. Well, there was a trademark problem with that, and consequently, you don't see it around anymore. But anyway, so with little or nothing to do, and I decided to do this. And so the quarry itself is pretty accurate of about 1920. Now in 1903, they went on strike. And the quarry basically was at a standstill. There was very little activity from 1903 to 1920. Now, and also that was during World War I. And one of the problems that the quarries had, they were waning as far as them being the preferred building material. But one of the problems they had, for example, a keg of black powder used to sell for $2 when these quarries were operating all around. And it jumped to $16 a keg. Now a keg is only, that high, maybe that big around. It's not a big canister at all. And anyway, it jumped to $16. And it actually caused most of the quarries to shut down. And the cost of high-grade steel, which they needed on this, was also scarce. That had to go into the water. So it was basically at a standstill at that point. But in the 1920, between 2020 and 1925, it was bought out by Earl Dodd of the Milford Pink Granite Company up in Massachusetts. And when he bought this quarry, this was considered the best equipped quarry in all of New England, was the quarry. It had everything in it. It had 5 miles of track, it had 3 locomotives. The locomotives was Duke, Brownie, and Maud. That was the name of the locomotives. And the only one that actually survived it when we were kids running around up there was Duke, and that was just sitting over there, just sitting there, and rusting away. And it also had a couple of one boxcar and a flat car. And on the flat car was all the cables and shackles and chains like that. They were just sitting there. But in the boxcar, there was it was all belts, all big belts to drive pulleys and stuff. And we didn't think anything of it. But after researching what they were using them for, they were actually bison. They were the buffalo hides, which was much stronger and much more flexible than a cowhide. And it was much stronger, and they used it for that. For example, they had, right in this particular area where this big building is, they had a horizontal steam engine, one engine, and it was located about in this area. And that steam engine was, like I said, horizontal, massive cylinder head on it, and it would go back and forth. And it turned a big flywheel that was made out of stone. And that stone flywheel was close to 6 foot in diameter, and a little over 1 foot thick, and that was its flywheel. But it drove a set of belts inside this building, as well as the other buildings. But it was a set of belts up inside this building, and you can see it on some of the pictures if you look closely, particularly the pictures that are inside this building. Had shafts running down each side, and these shafts were continuously turning all the time they were working on there. Now, if you had a drill press or a grinder or even surfacing machines and you needed power, you had the belt was sitting there idle on a pulley. There was 2 pulleys. One on this turning shaft was just sitting idle, and the other was keyed to the shaft and was turning. So if you needed power to your tool, you took a stick and you just moved the belt over and you had power to your tool. If you want to shut it off, you just push it back. And that's what, and this entire length of this building was with that. In fact, they actually had some stretched out all the way up into the quarry proper. That was a 2 1/4 inch shaft, these are, by the way. Went all the way up in there, and they were propped up on stumps, on stone and everything. Barrens, big barren boxes, full of babbitt. Very, very valuable material. And once Castellucci took this over, my grandfather no longer was the watchman. My grandfather wouldn't let anybody on the property. But anyway, once it was a mad dash to get those babbitt barrens. And I can remember there was like a free-for-all to get those. But at any rate, this building also had, in this building represented a loft and shed. That meant that they would do a full-scale model, whether made out of wood or paper, of whatever they had to manufacture. And then, as they had the powerhouse naturally had 2 massive boilers in it. And then you had the carpenter shop. And carpenters up there in a quarry were a very important trade. First of all, they did the woodwork on the derricks themselves. But also, each and every stone that left that quarry was crated. Not only was it crated, but it was photographed. And the dimensions on that stone, the job, of course, but the dimensions on that stone was recorded. Like, for example, if you had 100 stones that were all the same, you're only going to take one picture. But that was the stone that you wanted in order to replace or whatever you had to do. And that was stored in the office, which was a top right here next to the carpenter shop. And above that, up on a rocky knoll, as you go into the quarry today, the gate is right over here. You would pass by this knoll, and on top of it, the foundations are still up there of that building. More to the east of it was the blacksmith shop. There was 8 blacksmiths that were working all the time. Each one of the blacksmiths had a nipper. A nipper was a young person, a young boy, underage from working, by the way. They were probably child labor for sure. They were working, and they ran the tools. They would run a sharp tool up to the quarryman, or to the quarryman, and then take back a dull tool to be fixed by the blacksmith. Right? And they were constantly doing that. In front of each one of these forges was a big barrel of brine, which was salty water, and they used to grab their nippers and throw them in the barrel. The only problem with the barrel was it was salty, and to get the salt, they actually did it from Europe. So that to temper the steel itself. But at any rate, sometimes they would go up when they have long drill runs, and these guys would put a pad on their shoulder, and they would carry that long rod, sometimes 12 feet long, if they were doing deep holes. And I don't know if you ever carried a stick or whatever on any distance, but it did start bouncing as you step. They figured out that each time they took a step, they give it a quarter turn. Give it a quarter turn, and it just stay absolutely straight. And so, anyway, but they had the blacksmith shop. They had their own locomotive repair shops, and another thing they had there, and this was up in around the 1920s, was to get the stone to market. They also used oxen. They had 5 yoke oxen, and when that oxen came up to haul whatever they were hauling, they would haul it down to Ball's Dock. It was called Ball's Dock, but Ball's Dock was built by and owned by the Norcross brothers and Dot. It ended up being with Earl Dot. But they had, that stone pier was made for a purpose. It was to deliver cobblestone to the streets of New York. They were constantly going there. But the big job they had, and the main reason that they maintained the dock, was they would use all the stone for the Hudson River crossing was shipped from here down to the Ball's Dock, and by steamer or on a barge, and then a steam tug would come in, hook up, and tow it to New York. And through the research I've done on this, they used to maintain a dredge channel from Ball's Dock directly south, past Cutting to, straight out. And they would have that dredge channel just for that reason, to haul that stone out of here. Now the harbor, or the Hudson River crossing, it was called at the time, was actually the George Washington Bridge. So the haul road itself, the tracks, the railroad tracks at the time, they were impassable. You couldn't drive it. I can remember going up and visit my grandfather, which they ran the boarding house. My grandmother ran the boarding house up here. But at any rate, to come up over these tracks, you would actually be in the water, and the car would be bouncing along and go up to the boarding house. They had 2 boarding houses. One was Gillies Boarding House, And that was actually what, for more so the English and English speaking people. The DaRos boarding house was for the rest of them. Now, Gillies could harbor in there 25 people. The DaRos boarding house, when its capacity was 60 people. Wow. They could go under 60 men. And it was company rules that they had to be single men. Right? The married men had housing up here, what we call the Hemlock Hill. It's where Mark Martenstow lives up on top. But up here they had a row of houses that were actually quarry housing. Right? Foundations are still there. But anyway, over here at the DaRos homestead, there was every nationality that you could imagine that was in there. There was Portuguese, Spanish, there was German, Scandinavian, a lot of Scandinavians were in there, and Italians. And one thing that I remember was stories anyway, my father and my aunt married. There was 4 kids. But anyway, my father and my aunt Mary, Teresa, and Anthony, the 4 of them, all went to first grade together. The sheriff come up and knocked on the door and told my grandfather that these kids got to go to school. Well, anyway, my father knew a little bit of English, but he knew an awful lot of other languages. He knew Spanish and so forth on there. In that. My grandmother used to cook 3 meals a day for their boarders. They would pack on their lunch, the whole deal. And she would use their native, foods or things that they desired. And of course, she had some help. She would have some women folks would come out, because they also, not only did she do all the cooking, but they had to do the laundry for them, and the rooms had to be taken care of. Each room, I remember, each room had all the furniture was made out of oak. It had a bed, or a single bed, a writing table, and on the writing table was a kerosene lamp. And then on the kerosene lamp, next to the kerosene lamp was a pitcher and a basin and a dresser, made out of oak, and a chamber clock. That was in each room. But the thing that I remember about the old homestead up there, they had 47 rooms. Just had 47 rooms. And these workmen would draw on the walls. It was all whitewashed walls. They would sketch in charcoal or even paint. There are some pictures of their home country. And some of these things were absolutely beautiful. I mean, they were really a work of art that were on the wall, on these whitewashed walls or something. But anyway, the top 2 floors were for the boarders, and the bottom floor was, half of it was the kitchen and pantry and dining. The other half was for the family of the first floor. There was a door that went through each side. When I was a kid, this thing was, of course, shut down. But the building was still standing there when we were on in there. And he had a cow barn. They kept a big pig that we had to stay away from there because he said it would eat you, which it probably would have. And it was a mean thing. But anyway, he had the cows. And these cows, and inside this house on the first floor was a pitcher pump with a big basin, a deep basin. There was also a pitcher pump in the kitchen. But anyway, in the one in the center, you'd be in the house there or wherever, up playing around, and pretty soon the whole building would start shaking, and it was really, I mean, the building was doing this. What it was the cows were coming in for a drink of water. And they would actually walk inside the house. And they walk out into the garden or wherever they were going, and then the same thing when they came back. They would do the same thing. So, but inside that house, I remember the big wheels of cheese they used to make up there. You could smell the cheese inside that thing. She had an 8-burner stove, big like this. It had 8, and I said 8 burners, it had 8 holes, and it was wood fired. It was fired stuff. And inside the chimney, they had hooks. Inside the long hooks that would go up inside the chimneys. And they would smoke their own meat. Because the furnace or the cook stove is going 24 hours a day, every day, all year. Except when they wanted to clean the chimney. And so they would go cut down a cedar tree and throw a rope down and pull the cedar tree up. And the chimney was clean. My father told me one time that he didn't feel like going to cut down his tree to do that. He went and got a chicken and cooked the chicken. But that didn't work too good. Not as good as the cedar tree anyway. Anyway, so at any rate, when they needed to haul stone down there, like I said, with the oxen, they used to come up to his garden and go down through what today is some of the the paths and trails that you go on were these old roads, and they would go all the way down through Midlands pasture, down into what was Guilford Road, which is now 146, and then down into the docks, or to the train yard, either one. Prior to this quarry opening up, the Red Hill Quarry predated it by 2 or 3 years. Red Hill Quarry you got to from the end of Red Hill Road. That also had its own railroad. It came down through the further west of it, came down, crossed Guilford Road, went down by Ashman's Dump. I don't know if some of the old creekers might remember what was called Ashman's Dump, but down there on that corner, that sharp corner that went around was a dump. And then went across, and the pylons are still there that held that railroad train up, as well as the pylons of the old New Haven, New London, Stonington Railroad, which comes through the lot I have. Today, the main building up there is the coal bin. That was built in 1909 when they abandoned that road. The New York, New Haven, Hartford abandoned it, and they put in the coal bin instead. But anyway, Norcross builds a railroad down. They take over the right-of-way of the New Haven, New London Railroad and go into the siding in Stony Creek. The freight yard in Stony Creek had two sidings, or two sets of tracks. And one was went by the freight house, the big freight house there, and the other was for them to load and unload the stones. An interesting thing here was this derrick was a hand-operated derrick. They had 8 hand-operated derricks in this quarry and 11 steam-powered ones. So anyway, this was a hand-powered derrick here. And they were loading a big stone out from one car to a regular railroad car, and the dog breaks on the winch. So in order to hold a load up while they swing the stone over, they stuck a spike in the gear. And anyway, across the street there was 2 houses. Just on the west side of the railroad bridge, there was 2 houses up there. There's one new one there now, but there was 2 at one time. And one was a pig farm. They would raise pigs. But anyway, the other one was the Lucarellis lived in it. And Mrs. Lucarelli was looking out the window and said something bad happened over in their freight yard. Well, something bad did happen. that spike came out of the gear and hit Mr. Lucarelli in the leg. And he blooded that right there in the train yard. So, but she witnessed, you know, it was one of those things. The danger of the quarry was ever present. There was plenty of them that got hurt. In fact, my neighbors, one of their sons, Tommy Grandel, he died in this building. He was up on working on the track for the overhead crane. And I don't know what happened, but the crane operator didn't see him, knocked him off the ladder, and he hit his head, and he died right there in the spot. But another thing that they had up there was a problem. This quarry put all their workers under cover. They were all out of the weather, they were out of the rain, they were out of the heat, they were out of the snow. They were put under cover. That's what the labor department wants. You got to take care of these people. Beatty over in Guilford absolutely refused to do that. No way are they going to do that to my people. And he was right. Because what happened was the cases of consumption were much greater than people being inside the building than it was of the people outside. So, but most of these employees in the 1920s came from Beatty's Quarry. Beatty's Quarry shut down about that time, right around the war. They shut down. And most of those employees came over to here. They were employing over 400 men in this quarry. But I can remember as a kid, the old quarrymen would be there and they would cough and cough and cough. And when they started coughing up blood, they went about and got their affairs in order, because it was only a matter of a week or two that they were going to pass away. But one of the things, I was lucky enough to know a lot of those old guys, and I had a reasonable memory of what they were trying to tell me. I wish I would learned more or paid attention more, but they were very fascinating people. And the salt of the earth, the people that were in these quarries, the average quarryman was paid more than a factory worker. They actually paid a couple pennies more, but it was more. Because one of the things was the unions, the quarry unions, were the strongest unions in the country at the time. Because what was happening in the 1800s, late 1800s, the cities were burning down. They were all wood. They were burning down. So the architects and the building codes in particular specified that the buildings were now to be made out of either brick or stone. And so stone came into its own because of that in the 1800s, late 1800s. But the architects would take, and there was a real important building, and there was generally government buildings, banks, railroad stations, things like that. They used the stone, whether it had been limestone or granite, but they used stone. Stone sent a signal out there that this was an important building. And it was much more elegant building than you're going to get out of brick or any other product. So stone came into its being because of the building codes. But then it also went out because of the change of the way they're doing buildings. They started using more steel, started using more concrete, they started using glass. That was the demise of the quarries. So the quarries today or any of the quarries today, are mostly ornamental. You want your countertop, maybe a little bit of bench over here, bench over there. That's what it's amounted to. The bread and butter of the quarries, particularly up north, is monument work, which was the work that kept these jobs going between jobs. And I say between jobs because it was a cutthroat quarry business, stone business, was a very, very tough business, highly competitive business. And so you could go for a year with very little work. But if you maintain some work, and one of them was monument work. So a lot of monuments came out of this quarry. In fact, in this office over here, they used to keep the models of whatever the finished statue or monument or whatever they're making, such as you've seen on the South Station in Boston. That's all Stony Creek. There's the big eagles and all that stuff. It was all carved in this building. And anyway, they made models of it, but they were small. And then they increased the scale and that's how the sculptures had worked it up. But inside this building was photographs of every stone that left here, a record of that stone, a record of the pay record of every person that worked on here, and photographs, and as well as all the timesheets, contracts, blueprints, was all in this building. And my grandfather kept an eye on this thing from the 1933 all the way up to 1956. He was like a ghost. You weren't going to get away with anything. In fact, the tools were left on the benches of these things, and they stayed there for their 20 years and never moved because he made sure that. Of course, we kids would get down and break windows. But at any rate, and he made sure that nothing happened to that building. In the late 50s, after Castellucci bought the thing, some of the locals decided they're going up in the attic and going to go smoke cigarettes. And up in the attic up there, they stored all this seltzer that used for packing material. It was all up in the attic. They had and burnt that baby right to the ground. One night it went up and smoked. And when the firemen got there, they just let it go. There was nothing they were going to do with it anyway. So it was gone. But the history that went up that night was something that. So anyway, we look at this thing and I talk to these people. That's how I ended up doing this. It did get a little bit away from me, but it was there. They come out of the quarries, did another thing. One of them is the shops and the stores and the places of entertainment all started in a very short period of time. So for School Street, for example, one of the busiest streets in the town of Branford at the time, when they had tavern, of course a lot of taverns, they had a butcher shop, they had a bakery, they had shoe shop, dress shop, clothing shop, blacksmith shop, all on School Street. One of the houses that were the one right across from the parking lot, the municipal parking lot up here by the museum, that house was the quarry office. And they had a telegraph from that house to the quarry. That was the communication, just the wire running up there and that's how they communicated. In fact, if there was a problem in Stony Creek or something, they would signal by telegraph up there that there's a fire or something and they need people. And they would come down on the locomotive and go down to the fire. In fact, that's how that local fire company started in 1900. September 7th, 1900, that's how it started. By Algar Lamont Sutherland. He was the quarry foreman, superintendent, and he organized the Stony Creek Fire Department in 1900. Aside, he was an interesting man. He was born in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and he went to Wyoming. Wyoming wasn't a state then, but he was one of the very first representatives from the state of Wyoming. He came up, but then he ends up back here in Stony Creek Quarry. And he was the general superintendent at the time when they built the West Point Mine. Was a remarkable job. I mean, it was, I did a talk on that one time, but that took a lot of research. And in fact, I ended up with the archives up in West Point. I was corresponding with them as well as the National Archives. And we finally got the story straight. And it was the truth. It was so we managed to get that one right out. So anyway, one of the buildings I was here with, there were two of them. One of them was, which was the end of Flat Rock Road, was the Swedish bakery, which took care of Sweetville. Now Sweetville was all that where the winding Leaks Island Road goes through now. That was called Sweetville. They were all Swedes and Norwegians in there. But they also had a church. The church foundation is still there. It's at the very end of Flat Rock Road. And when they finally abandoned and, left here, they took all their furnishings out of this building. They moved it up to Roger Street, and that was the start of the Tabor Lutheran Church, which came from this church here. So, anyway, we had the school was already in place then. This was in 1886. This school was built. The first year it was built, it was already overloaded. So they had to have classes in people's homes. And that's what they actually went to double session. Then they had to actually move the kids out. They were, in different homes and stuff. That's how fast the population went up. Next to the school was that big house now on School Street. That was the Union Hall for the quarry. St. George's Union, or St. George's Chapter was that. That was the name of the union, was St. George's. St. George Union, during the strike of 1887, which was a huge strike, or 97, was a huge strike, they came to agreement with Norcross. And I think they were striking for a nickel an hour or whatever it was, more. They came to an agreement. But the National Union got wind of that, they were still on strike. So they came by force and took Stony Creek's St. George charter away from them.
What?
And I said, yeah, so that was that for them, until they settled again. So about every 5 years they used to go on strike. But anyway, that's what there was, at that time, there were 7 places in Stony Creek that you could buy fresh meat. And you had the butchers were right there. You had 7 individual taverns, but in all the hotels they had taverns too. So there was 3 or 4 of them here. And one of the hotels, the Flying Point Hotel, actually was owned by the quarry. They owned that building. And so, but anyway, they used to vote in those days by district. And the 2nd district, except for 1 year, voted to stay wet. The rest of the town of Brantford and Guilford went dry. So this became a booming. Anyway, that's I just did this because maybe somebody could, it would give you a rough idea of what this had and what these people have gone through on this thing. So anyway, I gladly answer any questions. I try to lay it out that almost all of this was farmland. It was all farmland on all sides. In fact, when we were kids, or even when we were a little older and you could go hunting, of course you go hunting then when I was 12 years old, but as long as you could carry the gun and put it in the right direction, you would. So anyway, we leave this homestead here, and we take off down the catwalk, which we call the catwalk. Today's a catwalk, but before they had a wooden pathway across Turkey Swamp, the the telephone company put a cable between the poles all the way up. This was almost way over a third of a mile. They would go across. There was a cable that were about 6 foot apart. And you would climb up the pole and you get on that thing and you would hold the top cable and you walk along the bottom cable all the way across. And now you were in Guilford. And the first thing you had, and the only civilization that you see, was Moose Hill Road. It was all pasture land up there. And you could actually walk from the old homestead here all the way to Sand Hill in Guilford without seeing one sign of civilization, other than open fields and pastures. But you didn't see any houses, you didn't see any of that stuff. So it was, and all this was hemlock. That's the other thing. It was all hemlock trees. And everywhere. It was all this would have represented mostly hemlock, other than some brush. But it was clear underneath these hemlock trees, because the canopy didn't let a lot of light in there, so you didn't get the underbrush that you have today. You go walking in the woods today, it's just all underbrush. But when this was all hemlocks, and that was like that all the way up to 1959, 1960, when that blight came in and ate all the trees. Wow. And you could actually sit up here at the house and look across, and you could see daily progression of those animals they ran. There were little bitty white worms that ate those trees up. And they were eating these trees up, and there were so many millions and millions of them that at night it sounded like steady rain. But it was from the droppings of these little bitty animals that would come down, and they would just wipe out the whole thing. I go in the woods now, I get lost because I lost all my landmarks that used to be with all hemlock. The reason I bring that up, this area in here was called the Klondike by the old timers, and on each side was high sheer cliff, covered with hemlock on the top, on the side, and down the bottom, with a small stream running through it. It was like an enchanted forest. It was beautiful. They sell this quarry, or Castellucci sells the quarry to the town of Branford, state of Connecticut, and the United States government, because they needed some cash to build the AT&T building. They needed capital. So they sell the 425 acres to those three entities. 50 acres of it is kept by the town, so that they could lease back the quarry to Castellucci, which was a very favorable thing for the town, and Castellucci was able to keep it. But the outcome of this, within months, the town fathers at that time decided what a perfect place for a dump. And if you want to see of that, now, that probably would help me get into politics, that where one or two people could actually make a difference. They organized this thing, and they just, I forget where, I think we had to go to I think maybe it was Seaside. They needed a big area to have this here. And I remember poor old John Slander came down, and boy did he get an earful of the thing. And they got out there and actually stopped that project. And John, to his credit, when he left, he says, there'll be no dump in there. And then he left. But that was really a hot issue. So anyway, now you got a place that people can enjoy, they can walk and do the thing. That was one of the better outcomes of that entire purchase of that property. So. And all those roads, and the trails and stuff were roads. All the way up into the mid-60s, you could drive your automobile, a good automobile. It didn't have to be an old junk. A good automobile all through these woods. Because those woods were all wide open. And it generally kept open because actually a couple times a year there'd be a mad dash up there. all the townsfolk, particularly the women and the kids, they go up and after mushrooms. And that was a big deal, going up and getting all the wild mushrooms up there. And I was, and I used to watch this, boy, you can't eat that mushroom, it's poison. But they were coming out with bush of baskets. So you can't eat, oh, now it's poison. So, they were, so anyway, I'm gonna say this, that I grew up in, my teenage years were in the 50s. And it had to be the best time for this community, without a doubt. And, I go down here, I gotta tell you one story. I went down to my grandfather had the cows, 2 cows. And they get away all the time. And they'd end up down in Farina's garden, and he'd give me a 2x4, go down and get them, and just give them a good whack, and But anyway, this one day, it was getting dark, cows were out, and Newer's orchard called them and says, your cows are up in my pasture. I'm up in my orchard. So, me and my father gonna go get the cows. So we walk from here up across, the Connecticut Turnpike wasn't there, right? We walk across, and the only thing that was up there was Route 1. We cross Route 1, we find the cows, and they were really going at it. They were full of apples. If they were half in the bag. I mean, these things weren't acting normal at all, but they really had gas. And anyway, we're walking back, and now it's nightfall, and my father said, just follow the cows. They're on the way, they'll find. So we're going back, and it was misty and a little bit rainy and all that. Stink, right? Anyway, we get all the way back to the house. They had kerosene lanterns, and they're looking, and it wasn't rain or dew. And these cows had diarrhea. They weren't walking down through the yard. You never get something that you don't forget. Anyway, that was my end of me chasing cows. All right. Well, I'm glad they answered the questions you have on it. Yes, sir.
I'd like to hear your take on the West Point Monument. I mean, that was a 70-foot long column.
There's pictures over there, an evolution of it, okay? That was a column that at the time was the tallest polished column in the world. But anyway, it actually was 47 feet finished. The column, the monument itself was over 85 feet. But so anyway, it was taken out of this quarry ledge. When it was taken out of the ledge, it weighed 300 tons. They come out and they roll that out, and they take a turn on that thing, and the men would get up there and chip the edges away. And they roll it again and chip the edges away. Roll it again and chip the edges away. And when they got down past the quarry derricks and all that water down there, they built a lathe. They actually built a lathe out of wood. And for years that lathe that was up in the quarry, it just rotted away, but it was made out of wood. And they cut the ends off of the stone to whatever length they were going to cut it. They made a big steel plate that on each side that could join it to it. They used 14 bolts around that were 1 3/4 thick. Big. Those were big bolts. 14 of them around on each side, and an 18-inch shaft holding the stone up. And it had to be perfect. So what they did was it stood off the stone, and what they did is they took molten sulfur, poured it between the stone, the steel and the stone, and made it perfectly plumb using piano wire and dropped it in plumb box. Much more accurate than the lasers today. That's what it is, they're perfect. So it had to be perfect, or the bearings would wear out in no time. So then the men would get up there on stage and keep chipping away until they got it reasonably round. Once it got round, and they were all hand tools, they were mostly bush hammers, and it would turn at 6 RPM. They had a 25 horsepower steam engine up on the roof of this temporary building they built, and it would turn. And when they finally got it round, smooth, relatively smooth, they had these, what they call planes, which were nothing but big cast iron hunks of cast iron. And they would set these on a beam across on top of the stone as it's turning. And it's slowly turning. And they would have guys down there shoveling a slurry of water and chilled shot. A chilled shot is molten cast iron, and they blasted with live steam. Had to have been exciting, but anyway, they blasted this thing with live steam, and the result would be millions of very sharp, tiny shot. They'd let it cool, and of course they would show it, and this cast iron blade would be eroding the stone away. Pretty soon it got fairly smooth. Then they would take these same lathes that were built to the contour of the stone. The stone, as they went there, started with 6 feet at one end and 5 feet at the other. And it had to make that transition. And this was all done by these planes. Once it got to that point, they put big pads under it and started shoveling emery up on front. And then slowly. And now we've gotten a little bit smoother. A little bit smoother each time. They changed the pads, a little finer stuff. A little bit. Till they finally got it down to where they wanted to polish it. They used the jeweler's rouge. Actually, it was jeweler's rouge. And they were put on there and they come out to this high finish, polished finish. It was 47 feet long. It took 2 railroad cars to get it to New York. And they went down this railroad with these 2 cars, down across the bridge, over to the New Haven, New London shoreline, on that Stonington Railroad, to Old Saybrook. Went to Old Saybrook, they ended up at the Hartford. On the Hartford, they went over to Fishkill, New York, crossed the Hudson River, and there's no railroad on the other side. So they made the railroad themselves. What they did was they took 2 sections of railroad that were tight, and they just kept leapfrogging it ahead. They took one of these hoisting engines, bolted it to the front car, and that's how they pulled it along. When they got to West Point, now if you've ever been to West Point, but it's a 12% grade to get up there. So this was no smooth, easy thing. It was a 12% grade to get up there. Once they got up there, they had to get around these buildings. So these tracks are built around buildings. And in fact, the turns were so tight that they had to cut some of the rods and the wood out from underneath the flat cars because it was almost coming back on itself. And these 2 cars ended up, they go along and they build a derrick to pick this up. Now, they didn't build one of these derricks because there was no derrick like this was going to hold it up. Every one of these wooden derricks was rated at 30 tons. At all these. So at any rate, they had this big stone that they had to somehow get up straight. They kick and they built a derrick, which was called a stage derrick. It was 4-sided, it was platforms all the way up. And big hoisting engine that was on the front of the locomotive, on the front of the flat car. Now it comes down onto the ground, they secure the ground, the cables go up, and now they have to move this thing off the flat cars. So they put the beams up, they put all this cribbing, they move it off the flat car, and now it's in line. But there's no way they're going to pick this thing up. So they jack it, and they just bring it up on a high angle, And now they hook it with the derrick picks it up, goes up straight. And what they did then was cut 4 feet of this big crate that it was in to protect it. In fact, when it went up that hill, not counting the railroad cars, it weighed 135 tons at that point. That's what they had to hoist up the hill. But anyway, this thing stands it up. But now they can't let it down. So in the foundation, they had a square stone that went down. It was about 2 foot square. The foundation, the pedestal of this thing is hollow. It had a cone shape in it, and one stone you could pull out. This cone shaped thing was full of sand. And this one stone was on top of the sand. They took this column, set it on top of that stone. And then they just went in there, shoveled the sand out, and down it came, nice and gently, put it on some lid slopes, job done. The derrick's up. Then they had to put the ball on top, the Lady of Victory on top of that. They did the whole thing. The ball itself weighed 4 tons. So during the cap. But at any rate, the interesting part of that was, I mentioned Sutherland before, he went on that project, and 12 men from Stony Creek did the entire job.
Wow.
12 men. That's building it there and standing it up and winching it up the hill.
How long did
So I hope I covered it.
How long did all of that take from beginning to?
It took 13 days just to get it to the Hudson River. Because the train could only go 6 to 10 miles an hour, otherwise they'd burn the journals up, the thing weighed so heavy. But from, to do the stone here, took them 5 months, okay? And 13 days to get it over to the thing. I think it took, if I remember correctly, it was like 2 months, the building of the derrick, the transport to the top and all. In fact, the commandant of the West Point dismisses the class and says you can go out there and see how this is done. Mm-hmm. And they went out, and then once they were up on the high angle, it only took a couple hours, and it was over. It was over. And, it was an interesting project, like you said. Yes, sir.
The 12 men that did this, do we know who they were?
I know one of them. One of the head rigger was Alec Greenville. He was Jake Greenville's grandfather.
It would really be nice to have a stone which depicts their names.
I don't know the names of the other ones, but I know they were, if I'd seen them, I'm sure I'd recognize it and know the families. But I thought that was quite a feat. They thought it was too. And by the way, that whole project, when it was all done, cost $42,000. That was fabricating it, holding it, and standing it up.
And you did a model of that and Hale's talk on that operation one time. Do you still have that model?
I still do, yeah. I built a model because how to explain that?
Yeah.
You know, that's
Well,
like
you
this,
just
how to
did,
explain this.
All right. Thank you all.
Yeah.